So thank you guys for joining my session, 3 Lessons from a Woman in Enterprise Architecture. This is actually the debut of this session, so humor me with your good constructive criticism for today. For today's conversation, kind of opening up our minds to consider those with non-IT related backgrounds for this type of job. We all are in positions today where we are seeing organizations that are really investing in endless platforms. A lot of it's AI, but we're really in a position where we need to bridge gaps and cross bridges that are maybe brand new construction, things we've never seen before or considered before. And enterprise architects are really a role that a lot of leaders might not realize they need until it's even maybe too late. We're in a position where we can come in with a fresh perspective, break down those silos, fix cumbersome processes, and hopefully reimagine the business value or find it again, or even bridge the gap between new business objectives and current state processes. And especially as we're talking more at this conference and outside of it about scaling AI inference. For example, 64% of organizations from a Google Cloud survey see business and system alignment as their top challenge. And enterprise architects is a unique role in a position to help solve that. Over the course of my career, and I'll share more about that as the talk goes on, I've been tapped on the shoulder for jobs along the way and chased others. Some of that chasing has been more successful than others. But now looking back, all of those decisions have led me to be an enterprise architect. And for women, EAs were less than 25%, most reports, some even less than 15%. So it's a big opportunity for women and those with diverse backgrounds, non-IT backgrounds to move into this space. So in our conversation today, I'm going to share a little bit more about my backgrounds. We'll also talk through, why women and those with diverse backgrounds should be considering EA jobs, and then also why hiring managers need to break maybe even subconscious biases to consider those that don't have formal IT backgrounds. And then also along the way, how to support and retain diverse talent. That's a very blurry picture of me, but I'm right here, so it's okay. So as I mentioned, I'm an enterprise architect, and I'm also the founder of Ulster Technologies based in Philly. I've spent close to 20 years in marketing and technology across a lot of different industries, most recently in healthcare. And what I've really found is that the hardest part of any large-scale technology problem isn't really the tech. It's the connecting the people and the processes around it so that it actually does the thing we need it to do. And it actually works in the long run, the short term and the long run. And that's actually what I enjoy focusing on. It could be a challenging conversation, challenging problem to solve, but it's a good challenge from my perspective. And working with business teams, working with IT teams, and translating and bridging that gap is a big part of what I do, and it actually makes it fun to work. And it really, for me, all started with a foundation in art and through hands-on internships. I do have a bachelor's in design and a master's in photography, so very not IT related at all. And then actually ran a wedding photography business for a decade down south, very far down south from here, but in the Carolinas. And like many of us, I navigated setbacks early. I actually was laid off from my job at Kodak when the housing bubble burst in 2008 and had to cobble together, freelancing gigs and part-time jobs until I ultimately landed in healthcare. And balanced, like most of us, career growth and family and more freelancing and professional development. And I actually, going back to school again in 2018, actually gave me a big push. Really showed me the importance of mentorship and networking. And then I actually stepped into a management job during the pandemic. And then about 2 years ago, I started a new chapter as an enterprise architect where 10% of my job became 100% of my job, and founded Ulster Technologies as well. And despite having more on my plate, it actually had a better work-life balance because I was working from home remotely 100% of the time. I could be a lot more intentional with volunteering, and then did a lot more professional development, including getting over my fear of public speaking, which is still very much a work in progress. All right, let's go next. Okay, so not to put myself in bubbles per se, but hopefully by kind of representing it in these kind of categories, you all see yourselves in a way in this. Like I said, for me, it really started with creativity and making. I was thankfully had very supportive parents who, when I had an idea to build a wearable airplane in middle school for a project, they got me more cardboard. They did not bat an eye that I was locked myself in the attic with a hot glue gun and duct tape. Thankfully, having that freedom and flexibility to chase the weird was welcome. And maybe actually would have been weird if I hadn't chased it. So being able to express myself creatively, visually, and through creative means as a kid has really, I think, opened the door now to thinking outside the box and not necessarily being scared of building visual representations and taking abstract things and building architecture diagrams. That comes pretty naturally to me based on the art background. Like I mentioned, I was laid off, which I know has probably happened to many of us. But that builds resilience and adaptability through that facing that adversity. And it comes with career pivots and shifting industries, as I've done over and over again, including parenthood and going back to school multiple times. And even though continuous adjustment and change can be really, can definitely weigh on you in the moment, now when I feel stuck in something, I know exactly how to kind of push myself out of it and break that habit again and get unstuck. Through curiosity and lifelong learning, it's definitely a challenge in a way to set aside time for professional development, but that has become a big part of my life. I'm always interested in learning more about something, always interested in, whether it's a formal degree program or certification or just coursework. It's definitely been a big part of my life to constantly learn more and ask those questions. And what comes with that is the courage to kind of take the risk on myself, which can be really scary sometimes, and especially the public speaking stuff. And it's been, I think, being intentional with those choices and taking the chance has really pushed me in a very good way. And that kind of dovetails pretty nicely into the community building and connection, because it's things like this where we're coming together in a mutual community to learn something, to hear about different topics where we might not actually have a whole lot in common. Like, for example, I don't code anything at all anymore, which I'm very thankful of. But, I did it in a past life, which kind of overlaps, I'm sure, with many of you. So building that sense of community has become, I think, for me, very, very important now, today, but has become, I think, important for a lot of us post-COVID as we're working remotely or just team members are, far, far away. And what kind of is maybe all-encompassing, kind of all around all this, but then also really a foundational layer is that purpose-driven balance. Because making intentional choices of how I'm spending my time or where I'm investing my energy and skill has been a challenge, but also very important in kind of how my background is working for me today. So actually, before we get into the lessons, I do want to talk a little bit more about finding purpose, because I feel like if you are in a place today where you're not sure if you have a purpose, the lessons might not mean too much. So we're going to kind of take a minute here. Because having a higher purpose isn't really a nice to have anymore. It's really a fundamental component of just existing at this point. So if you don't necessarily see yourself in your work all the time, that's fair. But if you're not connected to your work even 20 or 30% of the time, you probably feel like you're just kind of floating along. And your work is a checklist. Your work is a task list. And of course, we need to be able to pay our bills, and we want to be compensated fairly. But at the end of the day, we need to be able to feel connected to the organization's mission, vision, values in some way, shape, or form. And when we are able to solve meaningful problems, like in an EA role, that absolutely helps bridge kind of the gap of purpose. And when we have a purpose, ultimately we're seeing ourselves have more motivation. We're more resilient when things are going wrong, when we need to make tough choices on prioritization. It's easier for us to say no to distractions. And then we can make those tough decisions, whether it's investing or not investing in something, partnering or not partnering with certain vendors. And we can balance that short and long-term impact for the right reasons. When we have a purpose too, it also helps with burnout. I'm definitely on the recovery upswing in a big way from burnout. But when I found or refound purpose in my full-time position, it absolutely helped that situation. Because it moved me from something where I didn't feel like my work mattered to where maybe not every single thing I did mattered in the big picture, or maybe I couldn't connect every dot, but in big ways, I felt reconnected with the meaning of the why of what I was doing. When we have our purpose too, it also strengthens our people network and our ability to earn trust. When people are driven by purpose, it attracts similar folks, like connects with like. And we are able to start asking ourselves, what did my work actually contribute? And by that, we are able to really see that our career, big picture, long term, is doing something meaningful. And it's not just a series of jobs where you're getting promoted or a series of projects or releases even at a kind of micro level. And really big picture, it transforms the work from something we have to do to something we want to do. So at the start, I said that I actually enjoy solving complex problems, which is not everybody's cup of tea. But I actually don't mind and enjoy waking up and walking into my laundry room / office and working. So from an EA perspective, these roles offer us and those of us that are even in kind of tangentially related roles, platform architects, software architects, solution architects, we're solving real problems for real people. And that can be a big position of influence in an organization, whether you're one EA for a division like I am, or you're one EA across an entire organization. But bringing to the table our unique background, our unique perspectives, really can challenge the status quo. And ultimately, that is a big advantage and not a flaw from my perspective. It absolutely surprises people that I have an art background, but thankfully that is way after I've already impressed them with all my fabulous ideas. So it's a good thing. From a hiring manager perspective, we need to acknowledge that this is what team members want, right? Team members' perspective, current team members, want to connect themselves to kind of the higher purpose of an organization. Because this means higher engagement. This means stronger collaboration, team culture, even longer retention, which ultimately reduce HR costs in the long run, and then can be really the ripple of like a tidal wave of change almost of kind of moving in the right direction. So you may have heard the first kind of part of this sentence, but the second half of this is almost more important because I myself am a jack of all trades. Knowing a little bit of everything is definitely my happy place. But if you are a specialist, that is totally fine and also very, very good. And knowing which lane you're in is really important. And then as a jack of all trades, knowing who the specialists are and what they specialize in builds that collaboration and trust. So if it's not something I know or can answer, and maybe I'm not comfortable asking, AI or Googling it, I know exactly who to go to, who can give me a good answer right away, because I'm proactively building those relationships and establishing trust. So we're gonna dive right into lesson 1, and that is be curious. So curiosity fuels continuous learning. So whether that's professional development or asking questions, exploring new ideas, if you are curious, you will never plateau because you won't stop asking, you won't stop moving, regardless of your industry, regardless of your role. And at the end of the day, we really can't secure or integrate what we don't know about. So being able to ask those questions and nudge in a professional, positive way is really important. And if you're a hiring manager during interviews, if your interviewee asks no questions about the job or the company, that is usually a pretty big red flag. But hopefully they're asking thoughtful, open-ended questions that can tell you something about them, but then they're interviewing you just as much as you're interviewing them. Curiosity also drives problem solving and improvements. So instead of accepting things really at face value, when you're curious and you're asking questions, you're pushing yourself to connect the dots in a deeper way, but you're also pushing the other people in the conversation to really get to the root cause, find those creative solutions, and ultimately the opportunities that other people might miss. So I've definitely found in my experience a double-edged sword with asking questions, because you'll sometimes have individuals in conversations that think you're being difficult by asking a lot of questions, but that's a good opportunity to take kind of the high road and have a sidebar and explain, get their feedback or insights, especially if they're specialists, and really work with them so that you can articulate that your questions are intended to connect the dots. And we all connect those dots in different ways. My way is to ask those questions, whether it's verbally or in a chat, or even respond via email with, hopefully a reasonable list of bulleted questions. But that's just how I connect the dots. And we just need, and broadly speaking, we can be open-minded to accept more questions, and then that opens the door for other people to feel comfortable asking questions as well. Routine tasks too, as far as the problem-solving improvement side goes. Routine tasks are absolutely like a purpose killer from my perspective and my job. And that actually can sometimes hinder us when we're very curious people, because it's not new and challenging. And that's what, when you're curious, you're kind of always going for. But I absolutely love finding the solution, automating it, and then passing the admin off to someone else. But finding the solution is the fun part. Curiosity strengthens relationships too. I've already kind of touched on how asking those questions, connecting the dots with people can really be a big advantage in many, many ways. And being genuinely curious about others, whether they're people on your existing team, other product teams that are tangentially related. Networking can be pretty daunting when you walk into a room of seasoned pros, even coming into here where I'm not a developer and everyone else is. It can be a lot. But more than likely, I probably have something in common with each and every one of you, whether it's sports or books or hobby or whatnot. And that's the kind of common ground you can start with, even if it's kind of something not work-related. Curiosity also helps us navigate change. So when things shift, we're able to replace the fear and the nervousness and maybe the anxiety a little bit with exploration. So we can ask, questions like, what can I learn here instead of what will go wrong? And I guess, don't get me wrong, I'm absolutely big on risk management, but it's even more important to look at kind of the bright side of it and look at everything as an opportunity. And as someone coming in with a diverse background, we're used to navigating that. We're used to taking our really unrelated skills and translating them into something that's going to be productive for the next role. So whether that's something you do on a cover letter or through conversations, hiring managers might see me on paper, and I don't check any box. Technically, the job I have, I'm really not qualified for because I don't have an IT background. I didn't major in computer science. I've never held a data engineering type of job at all. But the skills and the projects I've worked on have thankfully built a reputation that has afforded me that tap on the shoulder. So it's a good challenge to kind of continuously try to prove myself in that way. But as a hiring manager, we need to kind of be curious in our own ways when we're looking at resumes or even in the interview process to kind of consider that the badminton match of jobs might actually have been intentional and not necessarily like something that happened to the candidate. And last but certainly not least, from a curiosity perspective, it drives innovation and growth. So most breakthroughs start with a simple question: what if we tried this differently? And curiosity is really the spark behind that progress. So whether you're personal or professional, really. And uncertainty in that space can lead to tremendous growth. When we're in, I think that's scarcity, right, breeds kind of that tremendous leaps and bounds. And if you're on social media, those leaps and bounds can kind of come out of nowhere. And what you're really not seeing is the probably daily grind that everyone is doing behind the scenes to make that big leap that they're talking about actually happen. And we chip away at it, just like me and practicing obnoxiously for this talk. So I wanted to share this kind of, hopefully you can kind of see the smaller text, but A big piece about being curious is having goals, but being honest about kind of the stupid goals in a way. So we all have kind of the good list, right, where we want to make an impact, help the team grow, and solve complex problems. But mentally or in reality, we strike like the personal goal that we have, right? Where in this example, it's buying a GT3, because you might feel guilty about it. But my suggestion, and this same suggestion that came from this coach.com, is keep it on there. Be honest to yourself. This is the goal you have, right? And for myself, that's retiring at 55, hell or high water. And admit to yourself, because that's the purpose for yourself, right? And that's going to continually drive you to stay curious and push yourself to ultimately accomplish that goal. And they call it strategic selfishness. I don't know that I would use even the word selfish, but it's just being honest with yourself that that's what you want to do. So lesson 2 is be authentic. And authenticity, big picture, matters for everybody. But for women in particular, it's especially powerful because we have this pressure to conform, whether it's our behavior, our leadership style, our communication style, verbally and in writing. And as an enterprise architect, we're partnering with everybody. Leadership, corner office, down to devs, everybody across industries, across teams, across experience, across titles. And a lot of these conversations that I'm in can be pretty passionate. Not arguments, because it doesn't never get that far, thankfully, but people they have their opinions, and our role is to kind of connect those dots in a way and find that happy ground and compromise. And all the while being confident in voicing best practices and standards that whether the organization has or compliance, legal angles, or just technology in general. But there is a fine line between authenticity and veiled ego. But part of being an enterprise architect is building that trust and credibility. Because we're going in there, complex problems, maybe we don't even know what the problem actually is, we're just wanting to resolve a symptom of it, or there's a business objective that we need to meet and we don't necessarily know how to meet that. But when we show up as ourselves, whether real voice, values, our diverse perspective, given our background and our experience, by nature, people will trust you more. And when that trust, that spawns into infinitely other things. But that is really the foundation for those strong professional relationships and leadership. And then ultimately, when we are asking questions and we're leaning on our curiosity, we are getting honest answers back. It also reduces burnout and strain because we're not constantly trying to be someone we're not. We're not code switching or masking or trying to fit in like the little box that our leadership might want us to be in. We are absolutely able to show up 100% as we are in a professional way to work. And that frees up our mental energy in a very big way to put it on the other things that we actually should be doing during the day instead of performing for our coworkers or leadership. When we are ourselves as well, we don't have to soften or shrink or adapt our style to be accepted in the workplace. Because when that happens, our ideas eventually get diluted. And any suggestion we might make isn't done as confidently. And so then the perception might be that you don't know what you're talking about. It's not as sound of as an idea as maybe it really is. And your recommendations maybe aren't as given the credibility that they really should be. Being authentic also helps us align our work with our values and our purpose. So similarly to just broadly finding your purpose, when you're authentic, it can give you the feeling of success, and you can acknowledge your success not by external standards, but by what you want your career to be in a meaningful way for yourself, and something that's fulfilling to you without you having to pretend to be someone you're not. And for me, this is really important in volunteering. I do a lot of volunteering work with a couple different organizations, and I have absolutely found myself, needing to not be myself in those scenarios to kind of fit in better or soften the recommendations, kind of trying to know my audience a little better. And that's not a great feeling in the long run. So we also, when we're authentic, are challenging limiting norms. So we are pushing the workplace boundaries that might not necessarily be good guardrails as far as not behavior necessarily, because you absolutely should be professional at work, but it can, for women, it's that kind of constraint on professionalism because we don't want to rub anybody the wrong way. We're maybe too direct, and it shows up or appears to be something else. But when women especially show up authentically, we are expanding what the ideas of traditional leadership and professionalism and success can look like. We're making space for other people to do the same. So for someone like me, as someone who has an art background, but it works in IT I now realize that there are way more people that work in IT that don't have IT backgrounds. I know more people in my current position and in past positions that have, engineering backgrounds or education backgrounds or even art history backgrounds. But the thinking and the lessons kind of we're talking about today has put them in the positions to be in the right conversations and handle those conversations in the right way to be able to move into these types of jobs. And the modeling of the permission, I think, might actually be the biggest and most important part of this lesson in a way, because it gives, like I said, it gives others the space and the confidence to do the same that we're doing. And short and long term, you'll start to see shifts in team culture, organizational culture, and then even in smaller team scenarios, psychological safety will start to be there. So, and then if it's not there, it becomes even more obvious. Let's see if there's anything. Okay, so this little cartoon here. A lot of my examples are from Coach.com. If you're not familiar with that website, it's a really, really fun website and newsletter. But I'm sure we've all been in this scenario. And when I left my last organization, I had been there for 12 years. And I was absolutely the guy on the right in a very good way because I created a monster. And the one good piece of advice I got from my last boss in that organization was that I needed to focus more on networking. And it wasn't because people didn't trust me, or it wasn't because I was unpopular, but it was because I didn't necessarily have the network of connections that could potentially move me kind of up into the next big thing. So I put more time and energy into it, and in 5 years, absolutely created this, slow and steady created this. Now in a new organization, I'm definitely started with a SAD plant, but I knew really early on that this was something that was important to build the network, build the relationships, the positive relationships that I could be a bridge to get more information, to help other people solve problems, even if it wasn't something that was officially on my desk. But so thankfully, I'm not quite to the monster again yet, but something to consider for yourselves that if you want to start building a network, even in small ways, you can reach out to people. They have a couple examples here, but reach out to people that were tangentially related products, people that you maybe worked on a project with in the recent past, anybody who you might think you have something even non-work related in common. And it doesn't necessarily, I guess you need to go into it assuming or with the mindset of that it's, you're not going to get anything out of it, I guess, is maybe the easiest way to say it. You need to make sure you're doing this kind of stuff for the right reasons. Because there are absolutely people, and I'm sure you've all worked with them, that they are absolutely just like the social butterflies of your office. And those aren't always the most productive kind of conversations. But if you do get to the point where you've created a monster and you are also a jack of all trades like me, more than likely one of the plants on my desk can help me if I'm stuck. And that's the whole kind of intention of starting to build this jungle of people that you're maybe just having like a, hey, how you doing kind of conversation, or helping them kick around an idea, but you know them well enough that their area of expertise might help you in the future. But you don't go into those conversations kind of with that mindset. And our last lesson here is lesson 3, be flawed. So acknowledging flaws at work is not a weakness. It's actually a key part of being effective and relatable and able to grow. And supporting professional development and curiosity, just like how curiosity keeps us from plateauing, acknowledging our flaws is a way that it highlights how we can improve and how we can grow and learn and evolve. Because if we were already perfect, there would be nowhere to go. And the only thing that is perfect is that no one is perfect. So whether we're talking about a roadmap for development, in a product, just as like we're talking about that, there's roadmaps for ourselves. And we should be creating those, whether it's, degrees and certifications and something, kind of official in that way. But it also could just be something you want to learn about that's maybe not even related to your job at all. But when we learn from mistakes, I guess that's maybe the biggest piece here that might be the most important. Because I've asked the question when I've been interviewing people, tell me about a time you learned from a past mistake. What's most recent issue? How'd you recover? How'd you move forward? And if someone doesn't have an answer to that, either they can't acknowledge that they made the mistake, they never learned the lesson that came from the mistake, and that's probably not a good fit. Big or small, they've happened, and it's important that we're paying enough attention that we can acknowledge it and then ultimately learn from it. A big part of this, too, is that we need to be judging ourselves based on, not based on the worst mistake we've ever made or the worst idea when we're talking about solving complex problems, but from the best solutions, because 1 out of 3 is still a success. Not every idea has to work, but when you're solving something so big and complicated like many of us are, you just need one idea that's going to keep you moving forward. Acknowledging our flaws also supports the building of trust and collaboration, because people tend to trust those who are real and not those who are pure flawless. We've all seen, and we all know the social media is very curated life. Everything is all picture perfect, hunky-dory. And we know that's not real. We can't trust it, right? But in the workplace, when someone accepts a mistake, that is signaling honesty, and it challenges the unrealistic expectations and ultimately strengthens the individual's credibility with you. Even people managers who, hear of a project or hear of an issue or a mistake in a forum, like team meeting or something even bigger than that, how they handle it in that team meeting, whether it's a big blow-up reaction or they coach the person on the side, how they acknowledge that flaw and then handle it can absolutely change the perception of that manager, right? Hiring managers, too, in this kind of scenario when we're talking about building trust, we need to know our own blind spots, right? So same can hire same in a lot of ways. So especially, we know the data that women EAs are 15 to 25% of the workforce. So, and enterprise architects is not a new type of job. So we need, as hiring managers, to be open to different candidates. And building that trust with an interviewee can happen in really small ways. Like if you're using a structured interview, you're asking the same questions to every candidate and kind of leveling the playing field regardless of their resume. Or even, let's see, what's the next thing? Or even if we are meeting candidates where they're at. So we're putting the questions in the chat, or we're typing the questions on a piece of paper and the piece of paper's on the desk to accommodate if the person, can process the question in a state of nervousness better visually or auditorily, right? And we need to be able to intentionally hire candidates that really round out the team to encourage the collaboration even more. And when we are acknowledging that we're not great at something, we are able to be open to constructive feedback. So all the mistakes that anyone makes in a given day can sometimes make you feel, inches tall. But at the same time, when we have collaboration and trust of a team, we are able to take in constructive feedback. It gives us that kind of "I got this" behavior in a way that can sometimes put us in more of a silo. But when we have constructive feedback or constructive friction in a conversation and collaboration, which is kind of a good argument in a way versus just a flat-out argument, that kind of good banter, right? It can ultimately signal, I guess, increased collaboration in the end. And through all of that banter, in a way, to an outsider, it can feel like a big argument. But the intent is to make the solution better, right? To make it, faster, cleaner, all of those sorts of things for the end user and the organization. And when we talk about getting feedback, by acknowledging our flaws, we're accepting that we're imperfect. And then that feedback can become a tool. So it moves away from being a personal attack, which sometimes it is, depending on the person and the delivery. But it's more of the mindset of how we're receiving that feedback that I think is the big kicker. So if we're able to get feedback more frequently about very specific things, then that is usually easier and more helpful to us in the long run. So in a way, if we're able to, if you're new to doing something, for example, whether it's, new title, or maybe you just took over a meeting series from somebody else, or whatever it might be, asking individuals, how did Tuesday's meeting go? Really specifically, not asking like broadly, how do you think I do running meetings? If there was a difficult conversation in a particular meeting, it can sometimes be helpful to hone in on that and ask a couple people at the same time, so that you get different perspectives. But it's important to do it more frequently than just your annual review, which not even everybody gets that. So it has to be a two-way street. And by you openly asking for feedback more often, then that also gives the latitude and gives the safe space for other people to ask you to do the same. Acknowledging our flaws also allows us to and fosters innovation and risk-taking, because we're trying new things. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we are sometimes getting it wrong. And if we expect ourselves to be flawless, you will absolutely avoid risk. You will never take the leap. You're never going to do the scary thing. You're never going to get in front of a room of strangers and talk for an hour. It's never going to happen, right? So you need to be able to bet on yourself and experiment. And if you're running an agile shop, this is all you do, right? We run in sprints for a reason, because you're going to iterate and ultimately make it better over the course of your sprints. I think it's very unrealistic, and sometimes that's the conversation I have with business teams, that in 2 weeks, it's not going to be perfect, right? You're going to get something. Might not be the whole thing. That would be a miracle in and of itself. But we want to fail fast and incrementally improve in the agile world, right? When we acknowledge our flaws too, it humanizes leadership. So leaders who acknowledge their flaws, are openly discussing mistakes and problems and challenges, are more approachable. And they're also creating those safer environments for other people to speak up and ask questions as well. So in a similar vein to how a manager handles an issue in a group setting, if they are acknowledging that the flaw existed and collaboratively trying to discuss a solution to make it better, it doesn't eliminate the fact that the flaw existed, but it's kind of taking them off a pedestal a little bit, that they're not willing to roll up their sleeves and help solve the problem. And then last here, for acknowledging flaws, it also helps reduce the risk of stress, exhaustion, and burnout, because we're not constantly trying to be perfect, right? Because we need to show ourselves some self-compassion, right? Accepting that we're flawed is a far better, healthier, and sustainable lifestyle than constantly trying to be perfect. We are mentally over-prepared in a lot of ways, and I'm no exception to that, to defend our position, defend our recommendations, defend the why of what we did or how we did something. And that is good in a way, because you should be prepared to answer those questions. But we should not have to do it with such tenacity. And women, I've seen it, I do it too. Women in the workplace, we are the first in the line to kind of overly explain ourselves, overcompensate in that way. And that absolutely leads to burnout and pressure. But if you're in an environment where your peers and your leadership can talk about mistakes in an open, collaborative way where it's less of a bad thing and more of an opportunity to improve, it can really flip the script on this. The last thing I'll mention here that admittedly is not a bullet point, but I challenge you to think of the things that maybe you think of yourself are negative aspects are really your superpowers. So for myself, like anxiety and overthinking, absolutely everything, is not great in some ways, but it is perfect when it comes to analyzing impacts and risk management, because I am 10 steps ahead of you. Right? I've already made the decision tree on all the permutations of all the things that could possibly happen for the next decade. And that is exhausting for my leadership, but it also gives them really a roadmap for all of the decisions they could possibly need to make. That is not great for detailed, repetitive work. I will be the first one to be bored and then ultimately actually not do that work because it's just so repetitive. Procrastination is kind of a similar side quest because I'm big on deadlines, and it helps me kind of intentionally procrastinate because I can break big projects into small things and do them along the way, which is great. So it looks like I'm procrastinating. I'm not. But without a deadline, that thing is never going to get done. It is going to constantly be at the bottom of the to-do list, But by me acknowledging openly that those are my challenges, my leadership steps up and they give me deadlines, even if they're fake, just so that I can kind of move things along. I got one more coached comic for you guys. This is about the feedback, where by nature, sometimes, myself included, we have that kind of defensive reaction to getting feedback. And no matter what it is, no matter who's telling it to us, or how little or a lot of tact they might have, you gotta just say thanks and tuck it away and come back to it when you are in a good mental state to hear it. Doesn't mean that the feedback's not true or valuable or helpful, but I'm sure, myself included, we've all been in a situation where the intent is good. They're giving you feedback because they are trying to help you, but we're distracted or we're amped up on something else or upset about something else, and we don't react very well. So when it comes to getting feedback, the reverse of this is you asking specific and often feedback and kind of getting ahead of it. When you're in the mindset to want the feedback, ask for it, because then it kind of breaks the cycle of this kind of like monster reaction. All right, so to kind of button it all up at the end of the day, which is maybe my biggest catchphrase, women and those of us with diverse backgrounds are absolutely the delta in these situations. Most of us have a very similar professional journey. You think your career will be like the black stair step, you work in a job 2 years, get a promotion, 2 more years, promotion. And in reality, you're the blue squiggle, right? We're all over the place all the time. And while men have their own traditional jobs, women are usually, and again, myself included, household management. We're juggling multiple personal and professional priorities. We're dealing with emotionally charged situations and people of all ages. We're bridging generational gaps with caregiving and communication. And then all around that and on top of it, we're trying to find purpose and deliver value at work and at home. 2 out of 3 volunteers are women, so we're absolutely trying to figure this out for ourselves to find purpose. And we do the glue work in a lot of invisible ways. So from my own fear of public speaking, I'll share that the fear of this has not compounded over time. Thankfully, it's not gotten worse. It's gotten less, actually. I can now eat before sessions like this. Couldn't even do that a year ago. And even a brand new session like this has really the same amount of fear baked in. But I get lessons learned, which is great. It gets a little better. It eases itself a little bit. And I would encourage you to do the scary thing, right? Learn the skill, right? You don't have to go all out and get a big certification day one, right? But watch a webinar, find a video about it, read articles about it. Maybe it turns out it's not really something that you're interested in, but try, learn, do the scary thing. Reach out to the new person that you maybe blipped into your head a couple months ago that would be a cool person to know. Start to build the jungle on your desk, right? Ask the question that might be nagging at you about that project or product. We all have traps in our head, right? The thing that's keeping us from, the thing that's holding us back, the thing that's keeping us from doing the scary thing and make us ultimately second guess ourselves. It could be imagined fear or real fear. We could be approval seeking and we're afraid we won't get that, or you could be a perfectionist. But I would encourage each of you to stay curious, be authentic, and embrace your flaws as those superpowers. And ultimately consider an EA gig for yourself or someone to add to your team. With that, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take them. And this is me and my info. If you want to connect or if you prefer to email me your question, I'm happy to answer it offline. But thanks, everybody.